A software engineer completes routine code reviews within hours but cannot begin the architecture document that could define her next promotion. A marketing director responds to every client email immediately, while a strategic campaign proposal remains untouched for weeks. These patterns reflect fundamental differences in how ADHD brains generate motivation compared to neurotypical brains. When researchers observe adults with ADHD struggling to engage with important tasks, several explanations typically emerge. Perhaps they lack organizational skills, feel overwhelmed by project scope, or haven't learned effective prioritization methods. Standard interventions follow: break large tasks into smaller components, implement better scheduling systems, commit to working for just 5 minutes. These approaches assume that recognizing importance should generate sufficient motivation to begin. Yet clinical observations reveal a more puzzling pattern. The same individual who cannot approach an important presentation may spend hours researching camping equipment for a hypothetical trip. They reorganize entire digital music libraries on weeknight evenings. They compose detailed responses to casual text messages while struggling to draft opening sentences for career-significant emails. Traditional explanations become inadequate when we examine this contrast more carefully. The issue isn't task complexity or size. It's not lack of awareness about priorities. Adults with ADHD often demonstrate acute understanding of what matters most. They think about important tasks constantly, experience guilt about delays, create detailed plans, and repeatedly commit to starting tomorrow. The emerging pattern appears more specific. ADHD brains engage readily with urgent tasks while struggling significantly with important ones. This creates tension between long-term priorities and immediate capability. The greater a task's importance to future success, the more difficult it becomes to initiate. As deadlines approach, however, the same work becomes increasingly accessible. From external perspectives, this resembles poor character or weak discipline. From internal experience, it feels like personal failure. Research suggests it's actually a neurological pattern with identifiable mechanisms involving specific brain circuits and neurotransmitter systems. Understanding ADHD motivation requires examining how the brain generates the drive to begin and sustain attention on tasks. Motivation functions as a neurochemical signal that enables the prefrontal cortex to override the brain's default preference for immediately rewarding activities. In neurotypical brains, this signal can emerge from abstract importance, though researchers are still investigating the precise mechanisms. Knowledge that something matters for future outcomes, career advancement, or relationships appears to influence dopamine and norepinephrine activity in circuits connecting prefrontal regions to motivation centers. This creates reliable activation when needed. ADHD brains operate through the same basic circuits, but with different signaling patterns. Dr. Russell Barkley's comprehensive review, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, a Clinical Workbook, 2015, synthesizes neuroimaging research documenting reduced dopamine receptor density in prefrontal regions and altered connectivity between executive control areas and motivation centers in ADHD. The activation system functions but requires specific conditions to operate reliably. Clinical observations over several decades suggest certain elements may help ADHD brains reach activation thresholds more consistently: interest, novelty, challenge, urgency, and personal passion. Individual responses vary considerably, and controlled studies examining each trigger systematically remain limited. These represent preliminary observations rather than established scientific consensus. Urgency appears particularly effective because it activates multiple neurochemical systems simultaneously. Approaching deadlines trigger stress hormone release, including cortisol and adrenaline alongside dopamine activity. This combination creates heightened arousal states where prefrontal engagement increases dramatically. Brains that couldn't focus on projects for weeks suddenly achieve sustained concentration for hours. However, abstract importance often fails to reliably activate these same systems in ADHD. Concepts like "this will advance my career in 6 months" engage rational, analytical brain regions, including the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. These areas excel at processing abstract information but don't consistently generate the neurochemical drive required for sustained attention. The cognitive understanding exists without the motivational fuel. This creates fundamental misalignment between ADHD brain activation requirements and conventional productivity expectations. Educational and workplace systems assume people can use importance as motivation fuel. Deadlines are established weeks or months ahead. Projects develop through phases with abstract milestones. Success requires sustained attention on work that matters but lacks immediate engagement. For many ADHD brains, this structure creates significant challenges. Maintaining focus on important but non-urgent tasks requires enormous effort, often leading to what appears as failure but actually represents mismatch between neurological needs and environmental design. Urgency seeking emerges as unconscious adaptation. When urgency provides one of few reliable activation pathways, individuals learn to wait for it. Projects become manageable at 11 p.m. before deadlines because that's when neurochemical conditions finally support engagement. This isn't chosen procrastination, but waiting for functional ignition systems. The neurological explanation, while compelling, faces several important limitations that complicate our understanding of ADHD motivation. Individual variation represents the first major complexity. Clinical observations suggest urgency-seeking patterns in many adults with ADHD, but others perform worse under pressure, and some show no clear activation patterns. Different brains respond distinctly to various triggers, making personal pattern recognition more valuable than assuming universal ADHD experiences. The relationship between dopamine and ADHD motivation proves more complex than early deficit models suggested. Dr. Nora Volkow's neuroimaging research at Brookhaven National Laboratory has documented intricate differences in ADHD dopamine function, including altered neurotransmitter activity patterns that vary by brain region and fluctuate throughout daily cycles. The same task might feel effortless at 10 a.m. and impossible at 2 p.m. due to shifting neurochemical conditions rather than willpower or energy changes. Real-world task categorization also complicates the importance versus urgency distinction. Tasks rarely exist in pure categories. Seemingly urgent emails may carry genuine importance. Apparently important projects may contain hidden urgency that brains detect while conscious minds dismiss. Dr. Ari Tuckman's 2022 survey of 180 adults with ADHD at Westchester University found many participants responding to emotional urgency, including disappointment, avoidance, perfectionism pressures, or anxiety rather than external deadlines alone. Replication challenges affect ADHD motivation research as well. Many foundational studies use small samples focused primarily on children or occurred in laboratory settings that don't reflect real-world complexity. Larger, more diverse replication attempts often find smaller and more variable effects than original reports suggested. Medication effects on motivation patterns remain incompletely understood. Stimulants increase dopamine availability, theoretically making important tasks more accessible. This occurs for many individuals, but effects aren't universal or consistent. Some people find medication helps with urgent tasks while leaving important task relationships unchanged. Others report increased awareness of the gap between obligations and capabilities, creating frustration rather than relief. The urgency-seeking pattern can become self-reinforcing in problematic ways. Repeated success with last-minute work teaches brains that this represents normal task completion. Neural pathways connecting urgency to activation strengthen, while pathways linking planning to activation weaken through disuse. What begins as neurological adaptation can evolve into psychological habits increasingly resistant to change. Recognizing that your brain operates through interest-based rather than importance-based activation fundamentally changes productivity approaches. This isn't about learning to care more about important tasks. It's about creating neurochemical conditions that make tasks engaging. The practical insight involves becoming a motivation engineer for your own brain. Instead of fighting urgency needs, you can manufacture them. Establish artificial deadlines with personal meaning. Create accountability through specific individuals who will monitor progress. Use body doubling by working alongside others, including virtual arrangements, to import social urgency into solo work. Manufactured urgency represents just one approach. Other activation triggers offer alternative engagement pathways. Inject novelty by changing work environments, using different tools, or approaching familiar tasks from new angles. Create challenge through specific performance goals or self-competition. Connect to passion by explicitly linking routine tasks to deeper values and long-term vision. These represent accessibility accommodations rather than productivity tricks. Just as mobility differences may require ramps for building access, ADHD may require artificial urgency for motivation access. No moral judgment attaches to this difference. It simply reflects how your brain functions. This understanding also transforms planning and time management relationships. Traditional advice assumes planning itself motivates by breaking projects into steps and scheduling them. For many ADHD brains, planning without activation triggers creates additional tasks that feel important but remain unengaging. Better to plan less while activating more. Instead of detailed project schedules, develop activation plans. What times support optimal brain function? Which environments enhance focus? What types of pressure, novelty, or challenge make tasks feel manageable? Honesty about urgency-dependent productivity costs becomes essential. Pressure-based work can produce excellent results but isn't sustainable long-term. It creates stress, limits creativity, strains relationships, and creates vulnerability to uncontrollable circumstances. The goal isn't eliminating urgency as a tool, but developing alternative options to avoid crisis-dependent productivity. Most importantly, this understanding should reshape self-perception. The gap between knowing importance and acting on it isn't character failure. It's not evidence of insufficient caring or effort. It demonstrates having a brain that works differently and requires different conditions for optimal function. That's not a limitation requiring conquest, but a difference requiring understanding and accommodation. ADHD brains don't seek urgency due to laziness or poor discipline. They seek urgency because it provides one of few reliable methods for generating neurochemical conditions necessary for sustained attention and motivation. Abstract importance often fails to trigger these systems consistently. Understanding this difference enables working with rather than against your brain's activation requirements. The goal isn't becoming someone who effortlessly tackles important but boring tasks. The goal is becoming someone who knows how to make important tasks engaging for the brain you actually have. That's not accepting limitations, that's engineering success.